UFO invasion. On July 19, 1952, one of the largest UFO events in history played out over the skies of Washington, D.C. The event was witnessed by people across the northeastern seaboard and verified by multiple ground radar stations. But over 70 years later, we finally have hard proof that something had in fact visited Earth on that fateful night, and the US government may have been lying about it the entire time. An event that for almost a century we believed had started over the skies of Washington actually had its beginnings in the night sky over Southern California. And we finally have hard proof. The new evidence for this incredible event comes from a recent study looking for artificial satellites in orbit around Earth before there were any human satellites there. As part of a wider investigation into the UFO-UAP phenomenon, a team of researchers began to look at evidence gathered by astronomical observatories in the past. After all, if anything artificial was in fact hanging out in Earth orbit, what better time to look for it than before mankind started filling that orbit with all manner of satellites and space trash? The results were almost immediately shocking. To find evidence of artificial satellites in Earth orbit, researchers look for what are known as fast transients, objects that are captured on photographic plates that appear and dim very rapidly. Often, these transients only appear on a single photographic plate and never reappear again, despite decades of repeated observations. These plates were taken as a form of early observations of the night sky. Starting in the late 19th century, the use of photographic plates revolutionized astronomy, allowing scientists to capture light over long exposures and revealing incredible new details about the galaxy we inhabit. Further, it allowed astronomers to visually record the thousands upon thousands of stars that make up our galaxy and beyond at a time when they were forced to make crude drawings of their observations that lacked significant detail or even accuracy. The long exposure times allowed for the discovery of heavenly bodies that even direct observation had failed to spot. From the very first photographic plate on, it became clear that the universe was filled with far more objects than we have ever dreamed of. And these same photographic plates could prove that some of those objects are of extraterrestrial origin. Because the heavens move more slowly over our heads, long exposure in photographic plates are perfect for mapping out the cosmos. After all, stars are so distant to us and their orbits so huge that even those in very fast orbits around the center of our galaxy barely move even in observations that could last for days, weeks, or months. Space is simply too vast for heavenly bodies to show significant movement on these old photographic plates, making them excellent for building the earliest accurate models of our cosmic neighborhood. And it's exactly that lack of significant shift that makes the phenomenon of fast transients a puzzling one. Historically, there has been little interest shown in detecting these fast transients, largely because modern science is driven more by the need to publish findings people actually want to read in order to secure future funding than basic curiosity, which should be the fundamental basis of science. UFOs, thanks to a deeply entrenched ridicule culture among academia and regular culture, are not an officially sanctioned mystery. Thus, the best source for hard proof of non-terrestrial objects in or around the Earth has largely been unexplored until now. One survey of fast transients in 2004 used deep lens survey data and detected 3 unusual events that flared with significant magnitude in comparison to nearby stars, but vanished in unusually short order, far too quickly for most conventional explanations. Other surveys have discovered everything from asteroids to brown dwarfs. To up the ante though, scientists began to look for transients that lasted less than a minute, producing many possible results but no definitive confirmation. The problem was human space junk. With thousands of satellites and even more pieces of discarded junk that all reflect the light of the sun, detecting non-man-made fast transients using modern survey data was proving all but impossible. That's when a research team decided to go back in time and start looking at survey data from before the launch of Sputnik in 1957. The best source of this was the Palomar Sky Survey, conducted in the early 1950s before there were any man-made objects circling the Earth. The Palomar Sky Survey was undertaken using the 48-inch telescope on Mount Palomar in Southern California. The survey used 2 sets of plates in order to capture color information of the night sky. The first exposure would use a blue-sensitive plate, and the second a red-sensitive plate. The exposures would then be taken within an hour of each other and put together to gather color data. The time difference between the 2 exposures allowed researchers to look for sub-hour fast transients, objects that appeared in the sky for less than an hour and would indicate either very weird astronomical events or a possible artificial object. The research team discovered thousands of these fast transients, including one with 9 sources of light that appeared in one image and did not appear in the next exposure less than an hour later. Poring over 70 years of surveys, these lights never reappeared again. In total, the team identified 83 cases of these fast transients that are difficult to explain. Gravitational lensing could explain some of these fast transients. This occurs when the light bends around a massive gravitational source like a black hole, allowing astronomers to see what's directly behind the object in the way. We have many examples of gravitational lensing due to the mass of entire galaxies bending light around them, and it's a very cool way of being able to peek at the universe behind objects that would normally block our view. In the right conditions, gravitational lensing could occur and be visible for a very short time, and some of these fast transients could be explained by this phenomenon. However, using some basic measurements, it quickly became clear to the research team that some of the fast transients would be extraordinarily difficult to explain with gravitational lensing. To make matters more complicated, the timing of one of those extraordinary events would beg the question, when is a coincidence not just a coincidence anymore? On the night of July 19, 1952, just before 9 p.m. Pacific Time, unbeknownst to the astronomers at the time, one of these fast transients made its appearance. Less than an hour later, it was gone. But all the way across the United States, one of the most well-documented UFO events in history was just starting to take place. These fast transients detected are not particularly impressive. 3 points of light, 2 in the same linear formation observed from other anomalous fast transients previously discovered. The objects show no elongation or distortion, indicating that at the time of their capture they were not in rapid movement similar to an aircraft, asteroid, or meteorite. In subsequent and even modern observations, the objects were no longer present. A careful investigation of the southernmost transient in comparison to neighboring stars proves that the object captured was in fact something emitting a significant amount of light. The northernmost 2 transients also exhibited properties that other stars do not, though there's simply not enough data to be sure. The transients are located within 1 degree of the galactic plane, which could potentially put a nail in the coffin of the artificial object theory given the density of objects along the galactic plane and the increased likelihood of a gravitational lensing effect being at play. However, further measurements make this almost impossible. First, the objects are almost certainly 3 individual yet related objects, all 3 of the transients dimmed at the same time, meaning it would be a truly cosmic coincidence. If they were 3 separate unrelated objects being lensed by a larger source of gravity, rather it appears that the objects were not only related to each other but dimming together, or simply leaving their positions over the observatory simultaneously. But if they were to be cosmic objects, dimming simultaneously, they would have to be within 50 light-minutes away from each other to account for their disappearance in the second photographic plate. This places the objects at a distance of no more than 6 astronomical units from each other. With this maximum separation, the objects thus could be no further away than 2 light-years from Earth. If the distance was greater than the given speed of light, they simply couldn't have dimmed simultaneously. That 2 light-years maximum distance is closer than the nearest star, and it's the only way that they could have appeared in the original 1952 plate and not reappeared in any other. This doesn't preclude a gravitational lensing effect, though. Such an effect would require the almost perfect alignment of a background star fainter than 25th magnitude, with foreground masses of planets or stars also fainter than the 25th magnitude, all lining up at exactly the right time during a very brief window to create the effect seen on the plates, and never repeating again in over 70 years. The second possible gravitational lensing explanation involves a massive explosion at a truly cosmic scale, lensed again by a system of planets and stars. However, the fact that the event had to occur and then dim in less than 50 minutes makes this impossible. There simply is no natural phenomenon that can release that much energy and dim again so quickly. Supernovae can take anywhere from hours to days to brighten and dim again, speaking against this potential explanation. And here we arrive at the uncomfortable conclusion. 3 separate objects within 2 light-years of Earth were shedding light for less than an hour before disappearing. Their existence almost definitively precludes all natural explanations. But it's what happened next that begs the question, are these the first official images of extraterrestrial technology? It's been called the Washington invasion, and it's one of the most popular UFO mass sightings in history. Terrifyingly, the events of July 19 would happen almost immediately after the astronomical survey captured those 3 fast transients on film. Starting on July 12, people had begun to report sightings of strange objects in the over the Washington, D.C. area. However, the weekend of July 19 to the 20th would prove to be the most historic, and it all began at 11:40 p.m. Eastern, right around the time that on the West Coast, the Palomar Observatory was conducting its survey. Air traffic controller Edward Nugent would be one of the first witnesses. While operating the radar at Washington National Airport, he spotted 7 unknown objects. The objects were not traversing any known flight paths, and there were no other aircraft in the area approximately 15 miles southwest of the airport. Calling over his supervisor, Nugent and Harry Barnes also observed the objects on the radar, with both later attesting that the objects performed extraordinary maneuvers no known aircraft could possibly match. It would all be an observation that radar operators and eyewitnesses from Washington to Moscow would repeat time and again for nearly a century. Suspecting a malfunction with the radar set, technicians checked the unit but discovered it to be in perfect working order. Barnes then phoned the airport's backup radar center and asked them if they were also tracking unknown objects. The center confirmed they too had the strange objects on their radar, and controller Howard Coghlan even said he could see one of the objects in the distance. Coghlan would describe it as a bright orange light, but struggled to make out details, though his description would mirror that given by other observers throughout the city that night. As both radar stations observed the strange objects, they became alarmed when additional objects began to appear over the Capitol and even the White House. Barnes immediately called Andrews Air Force Base, which was 10 miles away, though the controller said that they weren't picking anything up. However, one of the base's airmen soon called the control tower and reported spotting a strange object in the sky. William Brady, one of the controllers, looked in the direction of the report and suddenly saw what he described as an orange ball of fire that left behind a trail of light. The object moved with such incredible speed that when he turned to get the attention of the other controllers, the object had already disappeared. However, he would remain adamant that what he saw was not a meteor, given that the object showed the ability to accelerate and was not in a downward trajectory. Back at National Airport, pilot S.C. Pierman sat in the cockpit of his District of Columbia 4, waiting for permission to take off. While waiting, he was alerted over the radio that the control tower was tracking numerous unknown objects and they were moving in his direction. They asked him to see if he could get a visual, prompting Pierman to scan the sky. According to Pierman, he observed 6 different objects that he described as white, tailless, fast-moving lights. He was able to observe them for 14 minutes, during which he was in constant contact with Barnes back at the control tower. Barnes was able to track the objects appearing and disappearing on the radar exactly when and how Pierman described them. At Andrews Air Force Base, the growing alarm amongst the tower personnel led to them tracking objects such as meteors, which they mistook for possible UFOs. However, they also tracked the same objects that other radar stations were tracking, including an object that seemed to hover directly over a radio-navigating beacon. Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport also directly observed an orange-red light to the south of the base, describing the light as appearing to stand completely still, then making abrupt changes in direction and altitude. According to him, this occurred multiple times before it finally disappeared. Given the verification of multiple objects in airspace over the Capitol and the White House, U.S. Air Force F-94 Starfire jets were dispatched out of Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware. The jets arrived at 3 a.m. in the skies over Washington, prompting all of the tracked radar objects to immediately disappear. The jets remained on patrol over Washington until they finally began to run low on fuel and were forced to return to base, at which point the objects immediately returned to the skies over Washington. Barnes would later state that he believed the objects were directly monitoring radio traffic and evading the fighter jets, only to return as the jets left the area. The UFOs would continue to be tracked over the Capitol until about 5:30 a.m., when they finally disappeared from all radar scopes. A week later, though, the objects would return to the skies over Washington, during which they were directly observed on radar by U.S. Air Force Major Dewey Fournette, Project Blue Book's Pentagon liaison, and Lieutenant John Holcomb, a U.S. Navy radar specialist. Despite there being a slight temperature inversion present over the city, which is known to have an effect on ground-based radar, none of the radar operators present nor Holcomb believed it was significant enough to explain what they were tracking. Instead, all came to the same conclusion: the objects were solid, likely metallic, and very real. During the second event, another pair of F-94s were also dispatched, with one pilot spotting a glowing white light that immediately sped away as he approached it. Civilian pilots in the vicinity also confirmed sighting bright, glowing objects corresponding to the radar contacts being tracked on the ground. As the sun began to rise, though, the objects seemed to disappear and would not return. The entire incident would create a small panic in the U.S. government. President Truman was gravely concerned with the event, and the CIA would launch an official investigation into the UFO phenomenon itself. However, as UFO events propagated across the country, there was a significant concern that the Soviet Union could exploit the phenomenon to launch a surprise attack on the US or so panic. The fear was so great that it prompted the US government to attempt to downplay the UFO phenomenon and in many cases offer preposterous explanations roundly rejected by the public and professionals involved in these sightings. None of the radar operators from the nights of July 19th to the 20th or July 26th to the 27th would ever accept the official explanation put forward. That all of them had been fooled by a temperature inversion creating false contacts. Most telling though, immediately after the Washington flap, Major General John A. Samford would hold a press briefing during which he answered a reporter's question on if similar objects had been spotted by Air Force radars. The Major General stated that there had been hundreds of similar contacts, resulting in the dispatch of U.S. fighters. However, each attempt to intercept the tracked objects was fruitless. And this brings us back to the Palomar Observatory's discovery. Because a temperature inversion could not have explained the presence of 3 light-emitting objects situated anywhere from directly in Earth's orbit to as far as 2 light-years out, the incredible discovery begs the question, when is a coincidence simply not a coincidence anymore? Now go check out everything we learned from shocking congressional UFO.